What's the most adult realization you had as a young child? One day, I'm going to have to pay bills. I was 3 or 4 and didn't realize how far off that was, so I started freaking out cause I didn't have any money. My parents are people. I went to a work party and was amazed that my dad had a life outside of me. He has friends. He's funny. What? I had a similar moment when it suddenly dawned on me that my parents were actually people with flaws and lives and feelings. That was a weird moment. I was 8 and realized my mom's boyfriend of 5 years was a really mean person that could be violent, so I told my mom that she needed to break up with him. She got really mad at me, and that's when I realized my mother would never be someone that I could look up to or trust completely. 21 years later I still have those feelings about her. Or when I was 6 I saw my dad cry and realized that he wasn't the strongest man in the world. When I was about 10, I learned the truth about why my dad wasn't in my life. He was in prison for breaking the law in a serious way. It made me realize that parents are just people too. And it helped me realize that my mom was basically just a fragile lady, breaking her back and stretching her limits to provide for 2 young boys and give them a youth that didn't feel lacking or poor. Have an upvote from another kid raised by a mother working 3 jobs just so she felt that I wasn't missing out on anything. I learned at a very young age, probably around 5 or so, that being an adult meant working the hardest you can to do the best for yourself and others. I was about 8 sitting in the back seat of the car while my dad was driving us to the movies. We pass a man who was jogging with a slight limp. My dad begins to say, "See that jogger there? Obvious hamstring injury on the right hand side, metatarsal inflicted from velocity increased incline." It all sounded very clever and I nodded. I thought for a second. My dad isn't a doctor, nor does he jog, and we saw this guy for maybe only 3 seconds. I remember saying, "Wait a minute. You don't know that at all. That's all trash." My dad started laughing, and to this day he recounts this story to the family when his son found out he is an all-time bullshitter. My dad convinced a room of 12-year-olds he walked on water. The man can tell some bulls convincingly. That a woman's T is not located where her belly button is. I actually mentioned this out loud in front of a bunch of high schoolers when I was like 10. They showed me Hustler. Just learned a great way to get free hustlers. I diagnosed my type 1 diabetes when I was 9. From reading the Babysitter's Club books. My doctor didn't believe me and asked no follow-up questions. A month later, after I'd had strep throat 4 times in a row, they hospitalized me, and guess what, Fasapam, I told you so. I self-diagnosed my appendicitis when I was 13. I had a panic attack in my room and cried. Turns out I just had a stomachache and I was a hypochondriac. I was 6 years old and my family, brother, father and mother, and I had gone out for dinner and a movie. We went home for my mom to change clothes. I don't remember why she had to change, and she went into our house leaving us in the car. It seemed like we had waited forever when my dad said, "I'll go and find out what's taking so long." So my brother and I were outside waiting when my dad came running out of the house. I remember the look of panic and fear in his eyes. He got us out of the car and told us, "Run. Don't ask questions, just run to the neighbors." It was late and dark and our neighbor was almost 1 stroke to a mile down the road. I remember grabbing my little brother's hand and running, with tears streaming down my face and just being so scared. The next day when I went home we had cardboard and Visqueen SP on all the windows in the back of our house, about 4 or 5 windows total. My older brother had come home in a drug-fueled rage and shot out the windows in the back of the house and then took my mom hostage. The cops came and with the help of my dad calmed him down and took him into custody. No one was hurt luckily, but I think for the first time I truly knew what fear was. Terror of the unknown and maybe also hatred came into my life at that moment. TLDR, at 6 years old we had to run from our house because my brother took my mother hostage. We were sitting at a traffic light, and I was staring at the cars on the other side of the intersection. The epiphany dawned on me that what I would call my left was right to the people on the other side. After a minute or so of checking my mental work, I realized I was right. That opened the door to a whole new world of realizing other people could have a different perspective on something than I could. I was about 5 or 6. P.S. It's Ritalin. I had the biggest argument with Casey in 1st grade. His desk mirrored mine, because the classroom had desks set up in clusters. He kept insisting that left was right and vice versa. I was 10ish and a bit of a shoplifter. I would stash things from stores in my pockets for a rush. I then went to the library and actually stole a book instead of checking it out. I stashed all my stolen goodies in my closet until the guilt started eating me alive. I confessed to my mom how I could not live with myself anymore. I was a bad person, etc. I look back and think how dramatic I was with my lifted goosebumps book and jelly bracelet. The day before my 5th birthday, I realized that my parents, dad and stepmother, didn't know when my birthday was. He thought it was the 30th, and he just went along with it. Every year, when my 17th birthday was approaching, I decided that I wouldn't say anything to anybody about it. I had decided that the anguish of knowing they didn't care was worse than being ignored. The day of, my stepmother's mother called her to remind her that it was my birthday. The only good side to it was their guilt got me good presents. I'd rather have had a heartfelt hug, though. In 1st grade, I had the realization that I have only this one life to live and that no one else could live it for me. Everyone else had their own lives and we were just going through this world together. I don't know if that is such an adult realization, but at that moment, I felt like all the walls around me had fallen down. I still remember that feeling. It is adult, and you can confirm it with your own sentence. I felt like all the walls around me had fallen down. That's not a common feeling in 1st grade. I asked my 1st grade teacher if South America and Africa were ever together because they looked like they'd fit perfectly. She told me no and laughed at me. A few years later when I learned about Pangea, I wanted to smack a bee. Since I could remember, I always realized that school, K-12, and college were temporary, and that any goal I had needed to transcend those institutions. I think some of the greatest frustrations in life must come from people walking out of their graduation ceremonies and thinking, okay, now what? I'm glad it was a childhood realization for you, since for most people, it's a 18 or 22-year-old realization, this Redditor included. When I was around 6 and I found a childhood picture of my grandmother, it hit me that all old people used to be young once. They aren't just saying that to annoy you. Flipped my world, lem tell ya. After I lost my 1st tooth, the whole tooth fairy thing didn't add up. So I pulled my 2nd tooth out in bed and put it under my pillow. I did not get a shiny quarter. The next day I told my parents I lost my tooth, put it under my pillow and jackpot. I never told my parents. I just collected the quarters happily. After I worked out the fakery of Santa, tooth fairies and Easter bunnies, I actually felt guilty. I didn't want to tell my mum I knew in case it upset her, since she loved being all enthusiastic about them. At 7 years old I shattered my femur playing pee-wee football. During the 6 months I had to spend laying down, immobile. This was before the fancy surgeries we have now. I came to the realization that, no, I couldn't be anything I wanted to be. Due to both my poor eyesight and worthless right leg, I would never be a pro athlete or astronaut. I would never be a big strong man. I figured I probably wasn't as smart as most kids and couldn't be a scientist, either. And I had myself a little 7-year-old depression. That mentality stayed with me until I was in my senior year of high school when I decided, screw this, I might not make it, but I'm gonna do whatever I can to be whatever I want, even if it kills me. And now, you wouldn't even recognize me. I have no doubt that I wouldn't recognize you. When I was in 2nd grade, my grandfather died. I found a book laying around my grandma's house that was something like how to talk to your kids about death. At the time not really grasping I was being a troll, I read the section that had frequently asked questions by kids and how parents should address them. I then proceeded to ask my mom a battery of these questions, at which point she realized what I was doing and got visibly upset. I guess at that moment I realized I totally didn't understand the gravity of what was going on, and there are some questions no one, not even your parents, have the answers for. On a full weekend, my mother's drinking had escalated to full-blown alcoholic, and my father traveled a lot on business and had no idea. I woke up on Monday, mom passed out drunk, Dad who knows where, knowing I had to get to school somehow. I didn't have anyone to help me get ready or drive me to school. I cried, knowing that I was utterly alone. I realized at that moment that nobody is there for me, but me, and that if I needed something, I had to do it myself. I was 5 and in kindergarten. I showered, dressed, put cheese and crackers in a bag for lunch, and walked to school. I made it just in time. I was about 6 or 7 when I asked my mom if I had a flashlight and I was traveling at the speed of light, would I be able to see the light from the flashlight? She said yes, of course. Light is the fastest thing in the world. I then told her if I was going the speed of light then light would not be able to go faster than the fastest speed. This just tripped me out and I didn't even realize until much later that this concept is something Einstein used as inspiration for his theory of relativity. I would have pursued this further but I think Super Mario Kart came out that same year. I hate it when I'm discovering the inspiration for the theory of relativity and get sidetracked by Mario Kart. Happens all the time. In about 5th grade I thought about death for the first time. I wasn't really religious but our teacher was and she started talking about death for whatever reason. Mentioned eternal life in heaven or something and all I imagined was blackness forever. Scared the crap out of me at that age. It still scares the crap out of me. I think when I was 10 I broke my favorite vase and I tried to turn back time by closing my eyes and thinking really hard. I don't know what I was thinking back then. Anyways, after that ordeal, I learned that regretting would only waste my time since I can never turn back time and that instead, I should work on improving myself rather than grieving for my past mistakes. I wouldn't call it a realization so much as an idea. When I was about 5 or 6, I was for a short while convinced that the whole universe existed in someone's dreams, and that when he woke up, the universe would cease to exist. I'm 95% sure that I came up with this all by myself. Shortly after that, I realized that trying to reason about the universe itself, or anything beyond the universe, is an endless task that can never go further than speculation. Along these same lines, I clearly remember at around age 5 I asked my mother how we knew that we were not all just part of a dream. How do I know that I won't just wake up at one moment and start another real day? The dream hasn't stopped yet, so either sleeping takes a really long time or I'm in a coma and have a particularly detailed imagination. My parents were old, in their 40s when I was a kid. I recognized that the other kids' parents were amazingly immature. The younger they were the stupider, less reliable and consistent, and more likely to get angry over little things they were. My dad was 40 when I was born, my mom close to that. I always noticed how much younger the other kids' parents were, and how they would actually go out and do interesting things with more energy. I used to agonize myself over the fact that my parents would die a decade earlier than other parents. I guess my parents were more stable in a job sense, but their age has always worried me. I remember in 5th grade standing in the science lab looking at a moving model of the solar system while the teacher explained to the class the movement of all the heavenly bodies. When he explained that the moon always showed us the same face and said it just happened to spin right at that speed, I had a sudden epiphany. I raised my hand and asked if the moon was heavier on that side. He very quickly told me no, that it just happened to spin that way. I was crushed. I still remember the way my brain made the connection. It was a feeling of clarity that I got for an extended period only one time, during a game of chess that I owned. How can I get my brain to do that more? When I was about 11 or so it dawned on me that teachers don't know everything. I learned this when a bunch of my teacher's solutions or a test were horribly incorrect. After about a year of trying in elementary school, I decided that it didn't matter what other people thought of me. I've stuck to that philosophy ever since. I wish I learned that as early as you did. 5 years old coloring. Realization. Mom, is there a Santa Claus? Mom, making dinner. Number. Coloring some more. I guess then there is no Easter bunny either. Mom, nope. I remember sitting at mass, age 6 or so, wondering why everyone came to church when no one believed it. My logic being that, as I wasn't convinced by it, there is no way all those grown-ups could have been. This was not a lol Christians are dumb !1 moment. I learned that people can believe different things when presented with the same information, and that I as a reasonable being, could disagree with an authority figure, priest, parents, etc., on logical grounds. One time when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I asked my mother how many communion wafers I'd have to have in order to eat a whole Jesus. She smacked me. My dad always made a point of speaking calmly even in tense argumentative situations. As a kid I tried applying this technique in situations where I was trying to get something, such as a new toy, from my mom. I was surprised how much easier it was to get something across or get my way by just controlling the tone of my voice. As an adult, I still try my best to speak calmly during heated debates because it is truly surprising to me how much easier it is to communicate your point needs to another person when you try not to raise your voice. I remember being 6 years old and asking my mom where Barbies came from. She told me little kids in China made them and I promptly threw out all of them. I had a similar situation except it was my parents who stood up for me, not myself as you did. All of my teachers told my parents that I should be put on Ritalin but they refused to do so. I eventually grew out of it and became a great student, got my bachelor's and have had a great job for over 5 years now. I was 6 when I laughed at a dinner guest, roughly 25 or 30 years old, who asked my dad, applied math major and VP of some tech company, why people don't just pump water back up into hydroelectric dams to get more electricity. After I laughed my dad looked at me and asked why did you laugh? And I said, well you can't make energy like that. Just like when I put a marbles track in a U format, the marble slows down because of all the sound it is giving off. I didn't realize air resistance and all that, but I had the right idea. Nobody had taught that to me except for my toys. Then my dad opened up the encyclopedia to the second law of thermodynamics. It was hilarious the reaction the guest had. He swore I'd grow up to be an engineer or scientist, which I did. I began having existential questions pop up at around 12. Started when I was staring at a gap in between a door frame and trying to comprehend that the nothingness of that gap was a thing, but it also wasn't a thing. But at the same time it was a nothing that was necessary to exist in order for there to be a something, the door. Then I made that gap into my imaginary friend and started telling it things. Then in a way I was praying to that gap. Then I kind of replaced the concept of God with a gap. And then finally one day I realized how stupid it was to talk to a gap. The God of the gaps. One day after 6th grade I was in the truck with my dad waiting to get my sister from elementary school. I remember thinking very hard about it and being scared to ask, but I went ahead and asked my dad, do I have to believe in God? He looked at me and smiled and said, no, not if you don't want to. 'Twas a wonderful moment. Basically sums up the awesomeness of my dad. A bunch of my art was destroyed when our basement flooded. I remember thinking no matter how much we try to hold on to things, everything is temporary. It was one of my first big realizations. That if I were to accept the values that my parents and family were trying to pass on to me, I would be just as despicable as them. That there are people in the world that are just plain bad. Stepdad pushed my mum down a flight of stairs, then into the wall and started beating her in one of many angry outbursts he had. He is now in jail for making and dealing M. Before that I thought everyone was good and just had bad days. I was 8, I am now 21, and I'm glad I now have the power to stop something like that ever happening again. Most adult realization was that Disney movies trolled countless generations of children, and that many marriages do not, in fact, result in living happily ever after. Although granted, most fairy tales were told in a time when divorce was rare if not impossible. Point taken. I know, Disney families were usually single parent. But when you were a kid, is it what you remembered when you watched the movie? Or was it that when you kiss your one true love, sparkles fly all over and animals gain the powers of speech and that's how it finishes? In kindergarten, learning about mammals for the first time, I asked my teacher, so if humans are mammals, and so are other animals, then aren't humans animals? No, of course we aren't animals, she replied. Kindergarten me thinking to myself, yes we freaking are. I have a very good memory to my childhood. When I was 3 years old and watching TV, I still remember thinking, I am currently 3 years old. In 3 years, I will be 6 years old. I wonder what that will look like. How will it feel to look back and realize I am 3 years ahead of me now? Weird thoughts, right? And when I was 6, I of course thought back to being 3. LOL. It's not very significant, but it is a pretty deep thought for a 3-year-old, in my opinion. When I was 8 or 9 and Terminator 2 was on TV, I figured out that the movie would only be possible if there were multiple timelines and therefore several different realities. Terminator 2 led me to discover parallel universes as an adolescent. A week before my 8th birthday, I was kidnapped and physically shamed. The following 2 years, I worked with police attorneys, court counselors, was in and out of courtrooms, and finally took the stand against him. I put a diddler behind bars for life at that age. I realized that I did not have to be afraid, that I did not have to be a victim, and that I have the power to change my world. Not so much an adult realization, but it's one I've always remembered. Walking to assembly one day in infant school, kindergarten, counting to myself, and it clicking in my brain that everything after the teens number-wise repeats itself. A sudden realization that I can potentially count to infinity while all these other toddlers are counting to 10 on their fingers. I felt like a god. When I was a kid, my grandfather was really nice to my brother and I. More to my brother, because he's a boy and that's how the Europeans like him. But still, he loved me a lot and had pet names for me and everything. Everything was pretty great for a long time, until I started to see how he treated my grandmother. He was mean and degrading and demanding and intentionally hurtful, and my grandma was just sweet and caring in return. I stopped being able to connect with my grandfather and completely cut him out of my life for being so crappy to grandma. When I was about 8, after he hit her, I told her that she needs to get a divorce. She said that she'd been with him for too long to be able to do that she didn't mind when he got that way, and that God wouldn't like her anymore if she divorced him. I learned never to depend on someone so much that you can't live without them, that people will accept really bad things even though they don't have to, and that my grandmother's God, who she always said was full of love, was a mean prick who would rather someone get hurt than find a way to be happy. As a young kid, no lie, before I knew what astrophysics was, I thought to myself, there must be an equation for everything. Some formula that, if used correctly, can explain anything. An absolute equation of the universe. Something that can explain why cornflakes are crunchy as well as electron motion. Once I was ahead of my peers and realizing fundamental rules about the universe, one option I had before me was to continue on that course, enter academia, and maybe solve some piece of the grand puzzle. Instead, I decided to make sure other people's computers sort documents in the correct order. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.